this song for ya.
You're listening to Deep Purple Smoke on the Podcast. I will do one episode for each song the band recorded in the studio. However, this is a fan podcast and not band endorsed. It's more of a tribute to their long history, well beyond just the hits, and my way of giving something back to a band that has given so much to me. Let's dig in! Hello and welcome to Deep Purple Smoke on the Podcast. I am your host, Scott Haskin. You may know me from the Haskincast podcast. You may know me from Uriah Heep, the Magicians podcast, and now covering Deep Purple's extensive studio recorded catalog, one song at a time. And I've been having a lot of fun doing this and listening from a different perspective than just the casual listener or trying to learn a drum part or something like that, like really just digging into the fine points of the artistry in these songs. And I've enjoyed even discovering things I didn't know were in there, which is really cool. I mean, you know, most of these songs I've been listening to for a good majority of my life, and to be able to kind of just attack it from a different perspective and go, wow, I never heard that before. And all the times I've listened to this piece of music, never once knew that was even in there, is pretty cool. Today's song is interesting. I've looked at it from a couple of different perspectives, and I'm not sure how I feel about it lyrically. You guys know I'm not a big lyric guy, but this one's, it's one that you really feel an emotion coming out of Rod's voice, and you feel he's going through something. But what I can't figure out is it a sorrowful piece or is it a hopeful piece? Because I can kind of see it both ways. I can kind of see like, you know what, if this ever happened, great, but I don't think it ever will. Or I can also see it as, I think this is a reason to keep hanging on because I think there's a chance that it'll happen. So I don't know. I'm really torn on it. I don't know if I'll feel any differently by the end, but what I can tell you is that I absolutely love the music. I love the vocal approach. I love the sound of it. It's a great song. But I don't dig into meaning a lot, but every once in a while I'll come across something that makes me go, I can see multiple possibilities. So I wonder what the intention was or what other people think of it. So anyway, let's dig right into it. Here off of the Book of Taliesin, here we have Anthem.
When the night winds softly blow through my open window.
I love that cascading feel that we get from the organ opening. That's really cool. And of course, again, it's before the distortion, which would have been a completely different sound and a completely different mood to set the tone for what the song would be. So I really like the way it sounds. I think it fits perfectly. And we're getting this just beautiful Elvis-like voice from Rod coming through, and you just immediately feel an emotion coming off of him, coupled with what sounds like an acoustic guitar. I don't know if there was any acoustic simulation back then that you could play electric guitar and it would give that acoustic feel, but it does sound like an acoustic anyway, and I like it. I think it just like the organ and that just blend really well together underneath the vocal.
Then I start to remember the girl that brought me joy. Now the night winds softly blow, sadness to tomorrow, bringing tears to eyes so tired, eyes I thought could cry no more.
I've always thought that the bass was a little bit loud. I mean, I like what it's playing, but mix-wise, it always seemed a little bit loud. And I'm realizing, here we go again, realizing that Ian Pace is actually matching his notes with the bass drum. So that's giving it a little more punch and power to it. Wow, I love these little revelations.
If the day would only come then you might just appear, even though you'd soon be gone. When I reached out my hand, if I could see you, if only I could see you, to see if you are laughing or crying when the night winds softly blow.
Well, of course, I'm going to say I like the backing vocals. That's, needless to say, but I said it anyway, just in case there was any question. But what I'm really digging here actually is the percussion. I mean, we've got a nice tambourine going in the background, which is kind of unexpected that the chorus, it goes from kind of this like sorrowful verse to a more upbeat chorus. And that's where I'm kind of back and forth on how I feel about the intention of the song. But the other thing I really like are these just gentle ghost notes that Ian Pace is playing on the snare. Let's see, he's left-handed, so he'd be playing the hi-hat with his left and the snare with his right, which is the opposite of the way that right-handed drummers do it. So with his right hand, he's just doing these gentle rolls on the snare in between the snare hits. Not all of them, which makes it interesting. It's not a set specific pattern, but you could hear them in there just like da-da-da-da, da-da-da-da, da-da-da-da. Just these little bits of snare that we're getting in there. And it's something that's very common with his playing. And there's a song on Burn. It's a bonus track that we'll get to that really shows that off. But I think that's adding a lot to this song, because especially with a slower song, if you don't at least have some kind of dynamics, it can get a little bit boring. And I think that, instrumentation wise, it's staying interesting beneath the vocal.
In my dark and whispering room, memories still bring me a numbness to my feelings. Take my hand and brush my brow. In the warm and fever dark, heart is madly beating. My crazy thoughts are whirling.
You can hear that sort of ghost note quite a bit in this section here. It's you hear the snare, then the ghost note, then the bass drum, so like boom, bap, da-da-da, boom, bap, da-da-da. And it's that da-da-da that he's throwing in there that really keeps it interesting. You wouldn't expect in a slower, kind of sorrowful song that you would get those kind of drum dynamics, especially not consistently through a verse. But I think it just adds a lot. It really moves the song along when otherwise it might get a little stale. I also really am enjoying the strings in the background. They sound like a mellotron to me, but I did see an article that said that John Lord arranged the strings. So I don't know if that's an actual string section or a string quartet or not. But it has that sound of a mellotron to me. Either way, it's very pleasing to the ears. I think it brings out another depth and the emotion to go along with the vocal. So well done, whatever it is.
When the night winds softly blow, if the day would only come, then you might just appear, even though you'd soon be gone. When I reached out my hand, if I could see you, if only I could see you, to see if you are laughing or crying when the night winds softly blow.
I just realized I'm not really hearing a lot of Richie in this mix. I think what I'm capturing more in my right ear is he's just doing some strumming, which is really interesting that he's not really throwing in anything as far as, just like a few notes here or there to enhance the quality of the song. And he's really understanding that this is a mellow, not showing off piece of music. Or maybe he's just saying, all right, you know what, this one's going to feature Ian Pace a little bit more. We've got strings. We really don't need me throwing in, a few notes here and there. So he's just really playing a nice rhythm. And then, I love what Nick is playing because he's kind of all up and down the neck on this. And again, I mean, you could be just the kind of bass player that's doing just root notes and following along the chord progression and keeping it very simple. But much like Ian Pace, he's keeping the song really interesting on top of a really great vocal. Okay, so here's what I'm thinking, and I've never claimed to be an expert. I'm not saying I know everything about the band. This podcast is really just about how the music makes me feel, but sometimes I get a little bit curious about different things. So here's what I think. I think that what we're getting during the main part of the song is the mellotron. It sounds great, but I'm not hearing any, bow on string action. I'm not hearing anything when it changes notes. I'm really just hearing what sounds more like a mellotron. Here, obviously, these are live string instruments. So I think that's just what they arranged. I mean, there's no reason to have pay for those string instruments to be in the background. And they had John handle that. He had the mellotron, access to a mellotron anyway. And so it makes more sense to have done the verses and the choruses with the mellotron and then use just this section with outside paid musicians. Remember, they weren't a big band at this point. They had a hit with Hush, and Kentucky Woman would be a hit, but I mean, they weren't like a worldwide success. So, again, Tetragrammaton was not a huge company, so I imagine their budgets were a little bit low, especially after spending $1 million on the Shades of Deep Purple album cover. So it would be reasonable to say, hey, we want to do something to bring the feel of these songs to the next level, but we also have to be a little conservative about it. Now, another thing to think about is the psychology of it, because most people probably would not pick out the difference between those two. They hear strings in the middle of the song, they're like, oh, that's strings through the whole song, or wouldn't even think about the possibility that they weren't, that it was a mellotron. So when you put it in those terms, like you hire one, and they say this with people that do virtual instruments too. Like if you're doing a virtual orchestra, for example, hire one or two string players to do a first chair part over the top of it. And just the dynamics that you get out of that instrument will make the whole section sound like it was recorded as an actual live section. So you got your string section. Let's say that your lead is a violin or a viola, and you've got them in first chair, you're recording them, you're blending them in with the virtual orchestra track, and you get all those dynamics. So it sounds like it's a full section that you hired to record your song. Brilliant idea, works beautifully. And a lot of times you really can't tell. So it's an idea that works. And I don't know, what the actual psychology was when they were recording the album, but that certainly makes sense to me. And definitely, if you listen to how sharp these solo instruments are, definitely a big difference from what we're hearing in the verse. So again, that's just my theory. But either way, it's absolutely beautiful. Now, since I cut off right at the beginning of John Lord coming back in, I'm going to go back a couple of seconds so we can just get that flow again. Okay, first and foremost, I love that hanging note with just that slight pitch bend as it just fades into oblivion. Absolutely love that. It's always been one of my favorite parts of the song. But let's go back to where I started this section and talk about John Lord and his solo there with the strings playing behind him. This is very Beethoven-esque. You're getting the strings were solo. Now they're going to supporting instruments. So they're just playing just a gentle sound bed so that it gives the organ the ability of having something to play over, something to interact with, but not be intrusive on it. So it's just very gentle bed. And you hear this a lot from Beethoven. And it's one of the things about his style that I think attracts me the most is just that wonderful let's work together instrumentation. And it reminds me of when these days when you have like improvisational jazz, for example. And I've talked about this on the Haskincast podcast a few times and probably mentioned it on the Uriah Heep podcast a couple times. But when I've gone and seen bands that are playing just live jazz, and they're not, they might play a song that's a jazz standard, but sometimes they'll just do a jam. Somebody will start from somewhere. A piano player will start or a bass player will start. And then the next person gets an idea and they jump in, and then they all start playing. They all start figuring out their place. And then they'll nod to somebody. And whoever that person is, it's going to be time for them to have their solo section. While that's going on, the rest of the band backs off. They just play some basic stuff. They give them a foundation for that person to solo over. Then when that person's done, they all come back to whatever that original riff is that they've created. They nod to the next person until everybody in the band that wants to take a solo has gotten one, even the drummer. Now, with the drummer, it's a little bit different. With the drummer, a lot of times they'll just back off completely, or they'll just do accent hits because it's not a melodic instrument. So it's, it's done a little bit differently, and there's no beat behind it. So we have to deal with our own stuff as drummers. But that's one of the things that I really appreciate about that kind of music is that they know when to lay back and just give you something to play over, but also the space to go wherever you want to go within that structure. And that's what we're getting here. And that's one thing that Beethoven was just a master of. As I'm learning more about Mozart, I don't really know whether I feel he is or not. I don't know his music enough, but I'm looking forward to learning more and seeing. I know that John Lord had mentioned several times in different interviews that he was very heavily influenced by Beethoven. So I'm really not too surprised. This album has the part of the Seventh Symphony on it, second movement, first 3 minutes, and then this. So it definitely makes sense. One of my musical theories, and I've talked to just really a small amount of musicians about it, but when you have a vocal song and you have a solo instrument somewhere in the middle of things, that solo instrument needs to express the, ongoing emotion of whatever that vocal is, or change it where you're changing perspective. Like maybe you're really sad and then the guitar solo comes in and it's hopeful, and then the next vocal following would then be hopeful. I've always said that instrument needs to replace the vocal line in that section and cover for whatever that emotion is. And I think that what we're getting here is that really interesting combination of kind of pleading but hopeful from the guitar part here. And I really, really love that. I've always thought, for one, it's just a cool melody to play. But I really think that it covers kind of both sides of the emotion, again, leaving me with a big question mark. But it does end with chorus wise, it does end on that more hopeful note. So I could see if the song is a journey of going from, sad and why I'm, in this mood to, but there's hope and ending on that hope. If that's what the intention was, I could totally see that in the song, and maybe it is. But I really think that Richie captured the replacement of the vocal line here just absolutely beautifully.
If the day would only come, then you might just appear, even though you'd soon be gone. When I reached out my hand, if I could see you, if only I could see you, to see if you are laughing.
Something kind of weird here. Just all of a sudden, the bass has gotten muddy in the mix to me, and you can hear some dynamics in there, but all of a sudden, it's a little bit more in the background and less defined. So I don't know if that was intentional. If so, I can't imagine why it would have been. It's almost more like somebody hit a button or something that changed it to like an alternate EQ or turned something on or off by mistake that they shouldn't have. I don't know. It's kind of weird, but that's a shame because I can tell what he's playing is really cool, but it's just less defined in the mix. Now, sometimes when you have different instruments over top of something, obviously, you're pushing all the frequencies into two ears. So when you add a frequency or you add an instrument, it changes the sound of other instruments. It changes the volume level. It changes the way you hear it. But I don't really think there's anything added here that would do that. So can't really account for it. And maybe I'm the only one that hears it that way. But yeah, just all of a sudden in this chorus just came in really muddy to me. Very weird.
When the night wind softly blows.
Some stuff I found really interesting in this last section. For one, as Ian Pace is ending his part in the song, it feels like he slows down just a little bit. And then we get one more ghost note at the end. We don't get a crash cymbal or anything like that. We just get that one extra ghost note, which I thought was really cool. Then we go back to the beginning of the song with John Lord, what he played at the beginning. But then he starts to slow down also, which is, this has been done a few times already on these first couple of albums, and we're going to get a big one on the next album. But it's kind of weird. And then instead of ending, the note just kind of fades into nothing, which I think is super cool. I really like that it does that. But that cascading part, again, feels kind of somber. Then he plays a chord that really makes me feel sad, but then he changes one note to make me feel like it's all going to be okay again. And that's the very last note that we hear. Real emotional journey, this song. I didn't realize how deep it went until I started picking it apart. I don't know that I'll hear this song the same way I used to now, which is great. I mean, I love being able to appreciate it on a whole new level, but it's very strange that they did it that way. And then to not end it and just have that note fade out was a very interesting decision. Don't know whose decision it was. It could have been John's. It could have been the producers. It could have been Ian Pace going, hey, what would be cool is if we did this. And they tried it and it worked. Obviously, they had to have, had a finite ending at some point. He had to let go of that key. But the way that they chose to mix it was to just fade it out. So they probably just had him hold it for a little while, and then they said, "Okay, that's good enough. We'll fade it out. We've got enough on tape to be able to do a long fade like we want to." But it's very well done. Then there's like 5 seconds of just complete silence after that. So plenty of room. But yeah, interesting choices for sure. And, when you're writing a song, you're making literally millions of decisions. Every note, how long you hold it, how hard you hit it, what note comes before it, what note comes after it, how do they play together, how quickly does the next note come in, just millions of decisions that you're making while writing a song. Then when you're recording it, a lot of times so much of it is spontaneous, and it's just the way you happen to play it. And nobody thought it sounded bad, so you kept it, or somebody thought it sounded really good, so you kept it. I remember watching a few different videos of Ian Pace doing drum clinics over the last, couple of decades. And people will ask him, why did you do this in this song? And he goes, you have to understand, this is one out of maybe 2 or 3 takes. It was just recorded at that time, and that was it. When you're working in an independent band, a lot of times you get stuck to whatever it is that you like. So as a drummer, I'll take when I joined Joker's Wild, the drum fills that I came up with became part of the song. I didn't do a lot of, improvisation when we were on stage. Whatever I played during rehearsal, I really liked it. And so I just kept that, and it became a stock part of the song. So while looking back, I wish I would have done more. I wish I would have taken, maybe more chances, played some different things and made it more interesting. But at the time, that was where I was at as a musician. So I'm fine with that. But, with a guy like Ian Pace, listen to him live. I mean, sometimes you hear the same fills that you hear on the album, but a lot of times they're completely different. And if you listen from one live version to another live version, which I'll sometimes do just to check things out, they're different every time. So he's very improvisational. So you imagine when they recorded, he was very much the same way. And it's like, well, that's just what I played on that take, and that's the take we used. It really is that simple. It's not a lot of times a conscious thought of, here's what I need to play for this drum fill or this transition. It's just what comes out at the time. And I was thinking about this the other day as a drummer, thinking about, when do I decide what my fill is that I'm going to play next? And it's somewhere usually like in the last probably 4 measures before I have to play whatever the fill is going to be. I usually come up with it then, I think. I don't know for sure, because it's hard to think about when you're thinking about something while you're doing it at the same time. But I think it's within about 4 measures. If it's a faster tempo, probably a little earlier, probably like 8 measures or so. But generally, I'm going to say 4, because you have to know to some extent, I think, where you're headed, so that you lead at least with the correct hand. If your fill requires you, and you're a right-handed drummer, if your fill requires you to lead with your left hand, so that you end up with your crash cymbal on the right at the end of the fill, or wherever you need to be, then you have to know at least where to start. So to know where to start, you kind of have to know where you're going to go, at least to some extent, I would imagine. I mean, part of it could be subconscious. It's really hard to pinpoint that. I don't know if anyone else is able to do that better than I'm able to, but just trying to dissect it a little bit. So thinking about how much of it is improvisational, then, a lot of these things, it could be that the mix engineer just decided, John might have said, hey, I'm going to hold this for 8 seconds, and then I'm just going to stop and let the reverb carry it out. And then when they were mixing it, the engineer was like, I think this would work better if we just do a long fade. And John might not have had anything to do with that. I mean, we really don't know how it all came about. All we know is we're left with this end that, for me personally, only because he changed that note at the end, I feel satisfied. I feel okay. I feel optimistic. Had he not changed that note and we're left with the previous chord, I would have been left in despair. And it's really that simple, how you can change a feeling or an emotion in a listener. And that's one of the things I absolutely love about music, is that it's really that simple, and you can make them feel whatever you want to feel. It doesn't have to be exactly the same emotion. Like if you want despair versus sorrow, for example, as long as your point for them is to feel bad for a moment so that you can lift them up, let's say. Like we have here. He plays that chord, you're like, oh wow, this is like, it feels like the song is ending and this is kind of a bummer chord to go out on. And then he lifts that note and you're like, oh, all right. Well, I'm glad I got that out of my system. I'm glad we ended happy. I feel good. That's power. That's the power of music. And I love that he ended it the way he did. But I love that he gave us the sorrow before the joy, because it really just backs up my feeling on the song. It's really a journey, and feels good in the end, which is all that matters. So anyway, long-winded way of going around the fact that was Anthem by Deep Purple. I hope you guys enjoyed this episode. What a great song. I mean, dynamically, you've got strings, you've got just energetic and pace, you've got a Elvis-like Rod Evans, so much going on. Really cool song. I really love this one. Hope you guys do too. And guess what? We'll see you in the next episode of Deep Purple Smoke on the Podcast. Cheers. Thanks for listening to Deep Purple Smoke on the Podcast, a tour of the entire Deep Purple studio recordings. Please remember to give the show a rating on Apple Podcasts or wherever you're listening. Leave a comment and tell your friends. I also have a Patreon set up if you'd like to support the show. You can also write to me at smokeonthepodcast@gmail.com. I hope you enjoyed the episode, and thanks for listening.